Another spot where questions can be really important is when your kid is struggling with a problem. Maybe they've failed something, maybe they're having academic troubles. And I think a lot of parents' instinct at this point is to like swoop in and just tell kids how to do it or to fix the problem for them. But you've talked about a different strategy that also involves some questioning, this idea of collaborative troubleshooting. What is that? And give me an example of how that might work.
It's really profound thing that I see great tutors and great teachers do. They almost never tell answers to academic problems. So the temptation as a parent, like, so my daughter's in algebra 2 and she came home and they were doing some kind of factoring. I think it's like finding the square. And my temptation was to go and like figure out the trick, look at it and be like, okay, just do this. Like you're supposed to take that square root or divide by that. But I'd seen these great tutors and these great mentors. And I was like, all right, well, the first thing they almost always do is ask, what have you tried so far? And why do you think it's not working? And so then immediately, you know what the kid knows. And it's hard to ask that because if they're frustrated and they're like banging their head against the wall, your temptation is to prevent them from having to revisit those times where they weren't getting it. And so that's what I did with Scarlett. I was like, all right, show me what your teacher told you so far. And then she said stuff that I completely forgot because I last learned it when I was 14. And then I was like, well, okay, well, what happens? I see you're stuck here. Well, what happened if you do that? And I just was curious. I asked her to basically tinker with it. And then she explained, well, this won't work because of that. And then I could just be there as a guide and be like, well, but what would happen if you changed that? Or what would happen if you did? And so, but she was always the agent. She was always doing the problem solving. And then all of a sudden she remembered something the teacher had said 2 weeks before. And then she's like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to do it. Now I understand the pattern. So I didn't tell her anything about Algebra 2. I didn't actually go read the textbook. I just worked with her. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we swoop in and say, okay, here's how you factor the problem, or here's how you find the square, just do this, now try it, then it makes them feel like we think that they can't figure it out and that they are incompetent, which is not what you want, because there are 1,000 lessons like that throughout the school year in just one subject, and then you've got 7 subjects. So you want them to have the skill of being able to figure it out. But what's hard is when they're totally on their own and they feel overwhelmed and they're like, I can't do this. So weirdly, non-informative questions where you're not really telling them answers makes them feel supported enough to go troubleshoot. And it makes them feel like if they're stuck, they could ask you. But ultimately, they own the thinking at the end. And Mark Lepper in the 1990s, the famous social psychologist, did this study of the greatest tutors in the Bay Area, the people who get 2 standard deviations. And he found that 90% roughly of what they said was a question. It was not, they were great at explaining physics. And I think that lesson still holds today.
How can collaborative troubleshooting help in a case where your kid has kind of messed up maybe in the social domain or even in the moral domain?
The wrong approach, and they told me, was the yell, tell, blame, shame, the enforcer, authoritarian kind of approach. And to be honest, a lot of that approach, the yelling and telling, comes from our insecurity as parents, that we feel like, how could I possibly be the kind of parent where kids have so little respect for my house rules that they would break this so blatantly? Mm-hmm. It's more like we're insulted and offended more than it is our concern with their actual safety. And so the collaborative troubleshooting parents didn't take that offensive approach. Instead, they were legitimately curious about how the kid ended up having drunk too much. There was one kid who normally would just sneak like 2 wine coolers in his pockets, but this one day brought a backpack because he was trying to be a good friend to a lot of other people who asked for booze. And then he ended up drinking most of it. And so he got super drunk. But again, it came from this desire to be social and to help others. And so the punishment was to talk about his drinking and his plan every night before he went out. And it was an agonizing 45-minute conversation about his plan before he could go to a party. And that was a worse punishment than grounding. But in the end, they started understanding his logic and his plans, and they could subtly suggest things. And when that kid went to college, he didn't have any trouble with alcohol, and he had the skill. So it's a kind of never waste a crisis situation, and questioning really helps to build that mental muscle in the kid. There are a lot of moments in our kids' lives, trying out for a certain sport or activity, definitely taking a class, like applying for a summer job. There are these moments where they're going to be freaked out because it does have a big impact on their future, or they're not taking it seriously and they need to. And those are moments where you do have to be tough and demanding and unrelenting, but also supportive, so that way they see a reasonable path and their fears have to be legitimate to you. You have to be legitimately curious about why they're worried. But there's lots of crying in my house in those moments where it's like, you need to do this thing. But what I will focus on is like, how do I be honestly curious why you're being reluctant, and troubleshoot with you and find a solution that works for you. I'm not going to lower the standard, but it does matter to me that you're on board and that it feels good for you.